Hello and welcome to the Business of the Business podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Posh from the Two-Man Power Trip of Wrestling. And of course, joining me is the wizard himself, my co-host, Mr. Trumpmania, Mr. Lavi Margolin. Lavi, how you doing today, sir?
Hey, John, I'm doing well. I recently had my 43rd birthday, so I'm not as young as I used to be. And I
Happy
especially
birthday.
feel that when I go to a late night show during the week, but I couldn't miss this. I might be mispronouncing it, so apologies for that. But I went to the Sukaban show at the Capitale in Lower Manhattan in Chinatown on Bowery Street. And I have my, my live report.
I love it. As Hulk Hogan once said, every day, every one of the boys in the back get a day older. So you know what I mean. After every birthday, he's right on that one. So how was the show? How was the experience?
Yeah, so I'd love to like do something completely unique. I don't think I've ever been to even an all women show, and certainly a something that's tempting, or I would say it really was to be a very true to form Joshi, of course, women's Japanese wrestling promotion. Like that's just something cool that I wanted to experience. It was really unique, and I'm glad that I went. So there's so many different parts about it that were different. So first of all, I'd never been to the Capitol. I'm not sure if it's hosted pro wrestling before, but if it hasn't, it should have because it's a cool venue. I know that they've had boxing there before. It's about seven. It's reported 750 seats. It seemed a little bit small for that, but it was very dark also, so hard to tell. The audience was unique, which is always fun when it's like a different audience. Most of the people there were not like typical pro wrestling people. There was like older adults that were there just sort of like watching the spectacle of it. There were moms with little girls who seemed to be like anime or manga fans. Um, there was, young couples that looked like they would go to a club. So it made me curious because we know that there was a sellout very quickly, and then a waiting list. Um, my guess, and I have no evidence of this, my guess is that a fair amount of these tickets were comped, sort of like to bring in the right audience, or the people were connected in some way. There's so many different people like helping out with this, like from a milliner, right, like a hat maker, to a DJ was there. So like I feel like a lot of the audience was brought in, but that's just a total guess on my part. But it wasn't like that they had to like fill it later because the tickets did sell out within a couple of hours. I wasn't familiar with who the performers were previously, meaning that their names were changed to create these like four factions, sort of like I don't know if you would say superhero teams or just like different groups, like a gang, good women, bad women, and so on. Not to simplify it so much, but that part was unique, and I think a smart way to go about it. But certainly like top notch performers, I think from Stardom, New Japan, and TJPW. As somebody that's like a Joshi person is going to blast me out on Twitter or whatever for messing that up. But I know some people are just like, it's like the time of their lives because if you follow this and like here it is in front of you, it's I'm sure pretty amazing. But it was just an hour and a half. It's streamed on TikTok. The hour and a half though, it didn't feel like it should have been longer. Like it's just like you're just exhausted, like, or at least I was exhausted just in that hour and a half because the music was loud. The best part I would say like was the entrances because they had they were using like actual music. I'm sure if it's like rebroadcast in another way that I don't know if they would have paid for the rights to have that would be expensive, but that part just seemed cool. But they had like these anime videos that they made, which were really cool. The outfits for the most part were really interesting, great hats and that sort of thing. So really unique experience. I think that they have certainly an uphill battle. I think it's not going to be from like the mainstream pro wrestling that they'll look to catch on. I think they'll be pitching like, you know, anime and manga, like sort of related outlets to get distribution. I kid you not, like literally the guy that told me who I was sitting next to, who said he's like working for the promotion. somebody came over to him that was working there. Like they're like, "There's no money coming from TikTok." And I was like, you answered a question like before I even had it. I'm not saying that whoever said that knew or was representative or that's a fact, but it was just so funny just to hear that because you're curious. But I know on TikTok like people can sort of like you give like tips.
Right. Yep.
So they'll make whatever money it is from that way, but I don't think there was any sort of rights fee. And they gave out a lot. They gave out a program for free, and there was these like stations, sort of like each of these four factions sort of had like sort of like its own booth, kind of like it was a carnival. And at each of these booths was like free drinks and popcorn and stuff like that. They did have merchandise stands with t-shirts and event posters, but that was really unique. Also, like I mentioned, there was a DJ, Mike Johnson, who clearly has had good connections with them from the start. He had his usual like spot there where he was doing his I don't know what do you call it, simul typing on PW Insider. But what was really exciting, which I tweeted about, I got to meet Vlad for the first time. And the super fan, which was awesome. So I
Yes.
snapped a picture of him, and somebody on Twitter took a picture of the arena. Actually, Orange Crush, who works with GCW. So it showed like my bald head by the ring, the most evidence that I was there. Any questions that I can answer about it further? I'm not sure. I feel like I'm just rambling on about it.
No, no, good stuff. But right now, though, we are joined by our special guest who's popping on here, Mr. Box Brown. Box, what's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me on, fellas.
Hey, Box. A pleasure to talk to you. I know certainly over email you've been so helpful, and I'm so appreciative of you taking on some of the Trumpmania projects and the Six Figure Gamer. And apologies, I was rambling on about my Joshi experience. I don't know how long we were holding you
Uh,
on the line there.
I didn't hear the beginning, but it was fine.
Cool. So
So, of
let me turn
course,
over to John.
Box, artist, but also known as a award-winning, best-selling author. The new book, The He-Man Effect: How American Toy Makers Sold You Your Childhood. He had the best-selling book, Andre the Giant: Life and Legend, and of course, Is This Guy for Real? The unbelievable Andy Kaufman story. So, Box, how's everything going? What's going on in your world right now?
Not too much. I'm running a Kickstarter right now for my comic strip about the cannabis legalization process. It's called Legalization Nation. So it's taking up a lot of my time at the moment.
I love it though. From Trump mania to Andre the Giant to Andy Kaufman. I mean, and now cannabis. Pretty eclectic field you're running through there.
Yeah, people ask me like, where do you come up with your ideas? And it's just like, I don't know. I often am like slowly working on a project for like a decade before I realize that I've been working on one. I'm just kind
Yep.
of like doing stuff for my own amusement, and suddenly it clicks into place. So it's just having a lot of weird and varied interests, I guess.
So where did you actually grow up? We love asking that, like because that kind of tells the wrestling fandom to me. Usually, it's kind of centralized. Hey, grew up in the Northeast. I'm a WWF guy. So where did you grow up, and when did you start watching the
uh,
wrestling business?
I grew up in New Jersey. So I started watching. I think the first stuff I watched was like, wrestling superstars on Saturday mornings. WWE. I remember, starting to get into wrestling around WrestleMania 5 ish. Like I remember the Hulk Hogan Macho Man match, and I remember being, concerned. I didn't watch it, but I remember like being concerned about who Elizabeth was going to be in the corner of at the time. Um, and then, but I really, it really went to another level after WrestleMania 6, which I think about all the time. When that was like the first time I watched a big pay-per-view and at my friend's house, and we had like a really good time. And even though my friend cried at the end, um,
Same here.
yeah, but it was an emotional roller coaster, and that's always what stuck with me. And after that, I was hooked for life.
So, where in New Jersey are you from?
Like North Jersey, Union County area.
I grew up in Harrison and then moved to Homedale, now I'm in Asbury Park. So I'm a Jersey guy
Okay. Oh,
for
interesting.
life.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I just actually had the Asbury Park Press over here interviewing me in my studio.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, like just the other day. So the article will come out next week.
What's going to be the premise? Is it going to be more wrestling stuff
Uh,
or different?
it's about my cannabis strip, and I guess a little bit about He-Man and my books and things like that.
Where did you and why did you first start getting into art and like how did that kind of start for you?
So I was always drawing as a kid. Like I start, from like birth. As soon as I could hold a pencil, basically. But I didn't get into making comics until like college. I started, in high school I had stopped drawing for all of high school. For some reason I just decided to not do it anymore. And then after high school I got back into it I started drawing comics in when I was supposed to be taking notes in class. That's when I started drawing comics. And I would just show them to my friends and stuff. So I didn't really take it very seriously until a few years later, when I started reading alternative comics and stuff like James Kachalka and Daniel Close and Chris Ware, all those type of cartoonists, and that's when I decided to start taking it seriously. When it was like 2005.
So how do you go from like merging art and wrestling and when, where, why, how does that happen?
Um, so like when I first started making comics, the big thing was to make autobiographical comics. Um, everybody would do that, and I was doing that, and that was kind of like the first time I was doing like nonfiction. It was like nonfiction comics, but it was just about my life. And I moved on from that because I was like not. I didn't have any interesting. I wasn't doing anything interesting. My life was like I'd go get coffee and draw comics. There was no real other things going on. So I started doing from there. Moved to nonfiction, and started doing comics about like Bible stories and other myths and religious stories, and eventually started making comics about Andre the Giant because when I was making these comics, I'd made like hundreds of pages of comics at this point, and but I would always watch and listen to stuff on TV, like on my computer. And around this time, I had discovered like the High Spots shoot interviews, and that was when I listened to like all of them. I mean, I think it was the first time I ever heard wrestling where they, where they were like speaking frankly about the business and stuff, and kind of blew me away like completely. But that kind of was what led to the Andre the Giant comics.
What is the most interesting bit of feedback you've ever gotten on your pro wrestling artwork?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. I mean, I meet all kinds of fans, but one awesome thing is that I met somebody at a signing one time that was not a wrestling fan and had never read a comic before ever in her life, but was here buying my book just because she was a fan of nonfiction, which was, I thought, cool because I was like, I'm introducing this person, one, to comics, but also to pro wrestling. I always wanted to follow up with them and see if they stuck with either of those two things.
Now we'll hand it over to Lavi. Lavi, what do you got?
Yeah. So, Box, besides your really engaging art, my feeling is that one of your like really strengths that stands out is to take complex ideas and sort of distill it into, its basic parts and like present that in a way where it's like sleek. Like you don't have to say a lot, you don't have to show a lot, but there's a lot of depth to it, just in terms of like the way the faces look or what's being said. And I feel like talking about pro wrestling, the era that you were talking about, WrestleMania 5 and 6, like the storytelling, like it was really engaging, where you'd have a love triangle or professional jealousy, but it didn't have to be like somebody scripting, 20 writers in the room. And I think that's what's lost for pro wrestling. I'm not sure if you watch any of the modern stuff or like can comment on that, but like, do you think that that's sort of a lost art form?
A little bit. I mean, I feel like I'm like the oldest guy in the room sometimes when I watch pro wrestling, because I really want them to do more selling. Like like when I was watching it back then, I'm not saying this is the best way. This is just when I was a kid, I liked this. But if you look at Hulk Hogan's career, right? You could people often cite him as being like not a great wrestler, right? Not a great technical wrestler. He had like 5 moves or whatever that he did. But his obviously, and he did a lot more in Japan where he was working an athletic style. But in the States, like his real skill was his ability to sell. He was selling all of this. His whole match was him selling. That was the whole thing. It was all about him getting beat up, and he was good at that. I think that like we don't give him enough credit for being good at selling and like really making it look like he was not going to come back. I mean, like you'd watch a match him against like I don't know, some King Kong Bundy or something like that, like some huge guy, or even stuff later where within the first 5 minutes he's selling his ass off and sweating profusely, and like I just thought that he was so good at that. And the other, and that's so that I feel like that type of thing is missing a little bit from modern day wrestling. It's extremely fast paced. I think you could do a lot with people. I don't know, with the cell, and I think that would add a lot of impact. I know this is like a cliche / old head opinion, but I feel like it could do something. I mean, it could help.
So, sort of staying in the Andre universe for a little bit. Of course, everything about Andre is a legend. So, when you're obviously, like you're doing extensive research for these works. So, where do you say sort of like this seems legit, this doesn't? I'm not sure, but it makes a good story. Sort of like what goes into that process?
So like the first story I ever did about Andre that's not in the book, I had to deal with this exact thing, right? So the first one I ever did was a story about him fighting with Blackjack Mulligan. The story's in the book, but not in the same way, because the original story was based on a retelling by Smash from Demolition in a parking lot, like after a match or something like that, or after some sort of like event. He's telling the story, and it turns out after I had talked to Blackjack about it and other people, his story was like not correct. I mean, it was correct in the sense they got into a fight, but he had messed up all of the facts of the situation and made it a lot different than what actually happened. It wasn't a crazy story, but it was a lot different from what Smash had said. So, I think even when I talked to wrestlers for the book, asking them questions, they would be, you'd have to be like, "Are you telling me the truth now?" So you just have to kind of like use your intuition, I guess. And also, the real stories about Andre are stranger than fiction. So it is difficult, I think, and no doubt. I mean, I think that's why we called the book Life and Legend. That some of the stuff in there is of legend.
So, somebody that in the last few years, which is nice to see emerge, is Andre's daughter. Like, there was a convention in New Jersey where it was sort of like the children of wrestlers, many of which unfortunately had passed away, and I would have loved to have seen that. Have you connected with her, or has she ever reached out? Sort of like, I'd love to know what she thought about the book.
No, it was kind of a weird situation. So I was when I was writing this book, I was like a nobody, but I was looking to find her. I couldn't to talk to her, but I couldn't find her. It was before she was in the public eye, and then my book started coming out, and I think, then she came out. The Andrea Estate came out with their own book like right around the same time. Um, I think if I did it over again, maybe if I did it now, it would be much easier to contact her and get her involved in my book. Also, I didn't really know what I was doing that much back then, or how to contact people, or what to do, or my first book, I just did whatever my publisher told me. But so I'd always wanted to talk to her and talk about the situation with the book. I wonder if she ever read it or if she was mad about it.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds fair enough. Just in terms of projects, like it seems like Hulk Hogan sort of threads through a lot of your work. Did it just seem like too on the nose to do a book about Hulk Hogan? Like everyone's always talking about him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe after he's dead. But also, speaking of trying to figure out what's true and what's fictitious, like that Hulk Hogan's book would be like the most impossible book to do. It would almost be better to do it without his participation in it, because and even then, I mean, like there was a lot of stories in the Andre book that were, you hear the Bad News Brown fight. I remember, like, you'd hear Bad News's version and then hear Hogan's version, and like in Hogan's version, Bad News Brown like had a knife and was like gonna stab Andre, like which was like not the case at all. He was like taking his earring off, like, and Hogan was like, "Oh, he reached in his bag for a knife," which um, and so like you hear stories all. I mean, it's a cliche at this point of how how exaggerated and fake Hogan stories are. So I mean, I don't know.
So I have a theory that you have two pro wrestling graphic novels that are both top notch, because Andy Kaufman's book is really, a pro wrestling book. For me, I wasn't like, I had heard of the sitcom he was in and so on. And certainly I was like familiar with old school Memphis. But the first time it came on my radar was on Comedy Central.
Oh
I'm from
yeah.
Memphis, and it would be like
Mhm.
rerun like constantly, and it lived in my brain. Like, and I'll do a horrible impression, right? Like, oh, I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
just watching it, and like Jerry Lawler like wrestling these like freaks, quote unquote, and like
Oh yeah.
Memphis Mid South Coliseum only being like half full. Like there was just something that's
Yeah.
so fascinating. Was that sort of something that was like on your radar? Like,
Oh yeah.
too?
I like completely wanted the book to be 100% just about wrestling, and I wanted it to be like marketed that way. Also, like, I felt like the original cover I'd pitched was like him in the wrestling ring. Like, I think people were somewhat disappointed. I thought it was going to be a extremely in-depth story about his whole life, but really it was just, my aim was to talk about his wrestling career, which was only seen in snippets throughout. And it's in Man in the Moon, his the depiction of wrestling in Andy's career as like in his career, like everyone saw it as like, he was killing his career doing wrestling and all this stuff like that, which was silly. I mean, he was like just doing pro wrestling and he was amazing at it. And no one understood it at all. They were like, "Oh, he's just nuts." Like, no, he was doing pro wrestling 100%, and he was an amazing heel. Probably better than most of the guys on the roster, in doing heel mic work. And he was amazing. And I just like wanted to celebrate his pro wrestling career as it was. And I think that he was super influential on pro wrestling, because if you look at like after he died, before Andy Kaufman, there was this big, it was known throughout wrestling that celebrities were a big no-no, right? It was something that would kill the business or like harm the business in some way. Because if a celebrity could wrestle, then anybody could wrestle, and just it's not whatever, that whole thing. And after Andy Kaufman, there was a regime change, Vince Senior and Vince Junior. But after Andy Kaufman, we see WrestleMania 1, the Rock and Wrestle connection, like Mr. T, Cyndi Lauper, that whole thing, like Andy Warhol, that whole thing. I think that if Andy was still alive, he would have been 100% involved. I mean, it would have been Andy Kaufman and Hulk Hogan on Saturday Night Live or whatever.
Andy could have been living out his fantasy, like
Oh yeah,
like the
for real.
Like Billy Corgan in the NWA, just like doing it, whatever,
Yeah.
having so
but
much
he would
money
have been-
doesn't matter, and just doing whatever you want, even if people don't like it.
There at this giant, he would have been part of this huge mainstreaming of pro wrestling. It would have been amazing.
So in thinking about it, I think if and it, it really wasn't possible, but if Vince Senior would have been open to it, I think he would have fit in really well as like that fourth manager. That was like the goal, right? Like the Grand Wizard, Lou Albano, like those types. Like he would have been like a perfect.
I mean, he would have been a great foil to Freddie Blassie. I mean, he was already, he had that whole Breakfast with Blassie thing, and him and Blassie had like an interesting relationship. Blassie really liked Andy, and they like tried to interview Andy, or they tried to interview Blassie at Andy's funeral, and he wouldn't talk to me. He like couldn't maintain the Blassie character because he was upset about Andy's death.
So, do you believe he's really dead?
Yes, 100%.
Just making sure. There's enough kayfabe out there, and like the Man in the Moon did it so well. Like even like I don't know what Jim Carrey, he was too in character, and like I still sort of like believe it. I'm like maybe he was.
No, I mean it would be a nice thought, but I would have thought that he would have, if he did do that, he would have shown back up by now.
What's really interesting that I noticed with your art also, and again, thank you for the Trump mania Trump depiction, but I think there's at least two other times you drew Trump, and you drew him in different ways each time. Is that like sort of like for this project, I'm going to do it this way, or it's sort of like how you feel that day, or what goes into that?
No, I mean, I just am like inconsistent, I think, with the way I draw things are. And, a lot of what I'm doing, I think, has to do with novelty. Like, I want to see what this looks like in a different way or something like that. But I just don't have like a standard caricature kind of for anyone, except for when I do a book. Eventually, I come up with something for the characters in the book because you have to draw them so much and so often.
So in terms of the industry, I feel like certainly over the last 25 years, like the graphic novel has been well established. I mean, you could go back, 40 years to when it was actually established in Mao's and all those sort of things. But like in terms of just mainstream, consistent production, whereas like the comic book, like as a monthly thing, has like, everyone's been predicting its death forever, even when it's owned by huge conglomerates. Like,
right.
Did you ever like as a kid, I'd imagine you read like Marvel, DC, Image, or whatever, Valiant, whatever it was, but then at a certain, like, did you aspire to that and just found your way in graphic novels, or you just found like?
No, I mean, I don't think I ever professionally tried to pursue superhero comics, but when I was a kid, I would draw superheroes all the time. I had like every X-Men comics, and Iron Man I loved, and X-Force and X-Factor and all that type of stuff. Silver Surfer. I had all the Marvel characters. I was way into Marvel. I didn't really read DC, except for the death of Robin, the Robin comic I had. But yeah, I didn't try to draw. I could never do it. I mean, by that time it was just I was out of not. I don't think I was ever going to be able to draw the way you needed to draw for superhero comics.
So the question that I always ask people in the business is WCW Marvel or Battlemania Valiant? Which was better?
Wow. The Marvel WCW comics were kind of good. I mean, I had them in my bathroom for a really long time. They were kind of good. I mean, I had, it'd be like Sting. Excuse me. It was like Sting versus Cactus Jack. I remember. and those are really cool comics. And then I remember like there was Ultimate Warrior comics or like Undertaker comics too, but that came out like around that time. But I just remember being like, "There's no wrestling." It would be like Undertaker is a real Undertaker, and not like a pro wrestler.
The Ultimate Warrior one is notorious for a number of reasons. One is like trying to force WWF at the time to buy all the copies, and like
Right.
Unwanted sexual advances towards Santa Claus, I guess is a way to put it. So it's just it's one of those things that's like notorious, in the industry.
I remember when it came out. I mean, like, it just being like so weird, being like, "What is this?" Like, because his whole thing too was like, Ultimate Warrior wasn't just a pro wrestler; he was a character and like a guy and like, a real character from parts unknown or whatever.
I was surprised to learn, and certainly not celebrating this as that's how she supported her family, but I didn't realize that his wife, Dana Warrior, had worked for WWE for a number of years as a writer's assistant and so on, and was just recently let go in all of the layoffs, which is, sometimes you just don't hear about anything. Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Which was pretty amazing. So not to specify any particular comic or, as a sort of creative to creative, but what do you think about, like, it's almost like an onslaught of pro wrestling based comic books, and sometimes I think they feel the same, sort of like there's always like an evil owner and, backstage fighting, and so it's like hard to break that mold. I'm not sure if you check any of them out, or it's just sometimes the volume like just overwhelms.
I've read a few of the WWE comics. I wrote some WWE comics for Boom Studio. I was having fun writing them, but it would be like difficult to actually collaborate with the artist. You just like hand in the script and they hand it to the artist, and that would be it. I always wanted to like work a little bit more closely with the artist. But I would have fun with the characters and stuff. But there's a comic out right now that's supposed to be really good. I haven't read it, called "Do a Power Bomb," which is a pro wrestling comic. But yeah, I haven't really delved too hard into the pro wrestling comics scene. You'd think it would be an easy crossover because there's so many. Especially even when I was a kid, like everybody that watched wrestling also read comics. Like it seems like it would be a natural fit, and somehow it's awkward.
And I have mad respect for the guy from Headlock, just because he's always like on the road, like at every convention. Like, you got to make it work, which is awesome.
I will also say one more recommendation. The Jaime Hernandez book, Whoa Nelly, is it's fictional comics, but fictional wrestling. I mean, but great depictions of pro wrestling.
Awesome. Let me turn over to John.
So, Box, what is up next? What do you got going on? I know you kind of briefly talked about it, but what's next?
So I'm working on a weekly comic strip called Legalization Nation. That's like ongoing. I'm also working on fiction, like an actual graphic novel that's not nonfiction. That is a sci-fi comic about somebody that dies and they come back as like a Max Headroom type like face on a screen, and kind of terrorize their family.
Interesting. I love it. Where can everybody find you and all your work?
Boxbrown.com. Also on Twitter and Blue Sky as Boxbrown, and on Instagram as Boxbrown. And there's a Legalization Nation Kickstarter going on right now that you can check out. We're going to print a hardcover book.
All right. Awesome. Box, thank you so much for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Take it easy.
All right, Lavi, let's talk about some other news going on. What about SmackDown? Now that they have the deal with USA, the $1.4 billion deal with USA, moving off of Fox, which also may bring, rumored, the Saturday night's main event may return 4 times a year. What's going on with maybe some other possibilities for some other companies?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because for the first time in a while, you don't have a network carrying pro wrestling on over the air TV. And if it's like with the major promotions, right, everything is going behind the paywall once again, which is something that, obviously pro wrestling has been there a number of times, but certainly like with boxing, right, the decline of boxing in a way from the mainstream was like sort of taking it away from distribution. So here you'll have SmackDown on USA, and I forgot how long the deal's for, if it's 5 years, right? Imagine how small the cable universe will be by then, right? Like how much attrition every year. I'm still paying for for cable, just because just keep rolling it through. Um, so less people will have access to that. Let's say Raw and NXT. It seems like speculation is pointing towards Amazon Prime. So you have to subscribe over there, and if you don't want ads, you have to pay even more. So what do you have sort of just over the air now, right? You have syndication. So it just makes me like curious, like, is there the opportunity for pro wrestling to be nationally distributed again, like in terms of an inexpensive way, like as I always come back to, like something like the CW just seems like a great fit. I know that, or I understand that AEW sort of is like all in on on the Turner stations and in that world, but it just seems like it would be an opportunity for them at least to kick the tires with trying to get something over the air. Maybe some of the other promotions are kind of too small, to sustain something like that. But mm, what I felt like with last time SmackDown, or maybe the first time SmackDown moved from over the air to cable, like it bred like opportunities for like syndication, not necessarily in those primetime hours, but that was an opportunity that grew. So just curious to see, or if like pro wrestling in terms of like networks will just be off of over the air television.
What about some of the releases? Speaking of WB and what's going on with them, what about some of the releases? Can some of them succeed on the independents?
So in terms of the Twitter world, Trevor Dame had posted, I think people going, all these cuts are going to land on their feet, are thinking of the wrestling scene a few years ago. AEW's jammed, New Japan also, and it's not financially flush at the moment. Indie scene isn't exactly hot. And then Matt Cardona said, yes, it is. You're not as smart as you think you are, right? So with Cardona, I mean, credit to him, but he has to realize that he's an outlier, right? There's very few people that break out in that way. Prior to him, Cody, the Young Bucks, that sort of thing. But will people succeed now in the pro wrestling independent scene or land other places? I think it depends who it is. Like for people who have always lived in the NXT system, it's not like that they can't succeed, but you have to be open to learning about that world and exploring that world, and like making connections with the right promoters, having the right context, and so on. For those that came from that world, they can jump back into it. What's nice usually, if you had some visibility, so if you weren't just signed with NXT and then like only in like the coconut loop or whatever it is, like, and this has been true forever, like once you're just off TV like for 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, sometimes a year, like your name carries before like it becomes sort of like commonplace. So you can get a sense of what it's like. It's not, too much of a risk to explore it and then make decisions. But I don't think everyone can be absorbed. It's a difficult position to be in.
Just talked basically today. I was talking to a ex WB talent that just was released, and it does seem like I don't know, they're a little hot to trot. Not to say that they all are going to be like this, but they've got a lot of stuff coming their way. So it is that rare guy, but it's not everyone. I mean, there was 18 names right that were released so far. So I mean, I could see Dolph Ziggler, a couple other guys. This guy that I was talking to, I could see them succeeding, but I don't think everybody will. Like Matt Cardona, like you're saying, definitely an outlier for sure.
Yeah, and you have like, the conventions now are built out more, and podcasting opportunities and that sort of thing. So you do have the opportunity, but and it's like, if you're getting these monies like, not to work anywhere for 90 days depending on each release, which I don't know. You can sort of figure things out somewhat comfortably and then try it for 6 months, but kind of have a plan as we talked about last week, sort of like a long-term plan to sustain, as it'll work out for some, but probably not for most.
So, as far as some alternate broadcasts and what's going on with the NFL and stuff, what is some of these lessons that can be learned for the pro wrestling business?
Yeah, it's a hard thing to know, but like, especially pro wrestling, as we talk about, like looking for the mainstream. There's always different ways to look at things, like an NFL or MLB broadcast. Like, given people's attention spans now, it's very hard to maintain it. So the NFL smartly has been working with different groups, right? There was the Nickelodeon thing where they would like superimpose like a slime splash zone, and now it looks like there's going to be something with Toy Story where you can watch, and there'll be different
Yep.
animation and some of the Toy Story characters coming in. So with those that watch pro wrestling now, it generally won't be met well because people don't like anything that's out of their purview of understanding. But it could be something to attract new people or engage them.
So, as far as NWA is concerned, what is this show? Is it Sam Hain? What is this NWA show coming up?
Yeah, it's they came up with the name pretty out of nowhere, and I haven't seen it explained, but it's going to be like I don't know if you go so far as to say a death match show, but it'll be sort of like a more extreme show. And they booked this venue in Cleveland, and it looks quite large as a theater in terms of what they're used to. And a couple hours in, most of the tickets were still available. So I don't know if they're going to move a lot of tickets, but it's very ambitious and curious to see how it goes.
Yeah, very, very ambitious out there in Cleveland, Ohio. Of course, the world champion, EC3, is a Cleveland, Ohio alum. He's from Cleveland, so maybe that'll help with some ticket sales, or hopefully help with some ticket sales for Billy Corgan's NWA.
Yeah, and it's interesting that like even though EC3 is known and somewhat like not everyone is loves his work, but it just has seemed like a breath of fresh air since they turned the title over from Tyrus. That EC3 is saying he wants to defend it all over the world, and just a little bit of a different thing. So like shaking off a little bit of that control your narrative thing that he was doing, and this might be a fresh start.
Let's talk about the Rose Bowl because it's always pretty cool when different wrestling organizations run these cool, awesome, old school venues. What's going on with PCW Ultra and the Rose Bowl out there in California?
Yeah, so the best way maybe to look at it is like remember when New Japan was running like the LA Coliseum, and you're like they are, and then there was like there's a little space outside where the torch is, and they were running that. So I did look into this, and basically, before a football game, before UCLA against Washington State, there you could buy tickets to see their show in a smaller venue that's part of the Rose Bowl. So it's not even. I don't know if it's going to be. It's not totally outside. Maybe it's inside or somewhat enclosed, but generally that venue is 750 seats. So they have no designs on running like this 50,000 seat or whatever size venue, but it's more a special opportunity, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to connect, especially with something like big time college football.
And that's pretty cool because you can say, hey, I ran the Rose Bowl. You know what I mean? That's kind of cool.
Exactly, and most people are just looking at it like, yeah, they're running the Rose Bowl, and not even like clicking through and like
Yeah.
being like, that's awesome,
Yeah. Yep. So what's going on with United Wrestling Network? Our buddy Dave Marquez. What's the latest with him?
So Dave Marquez has been hinting at things for a while. I'm not sure if this was what he had meant, but basically, Primetime Live UWN programming returns to Infinite Reality Studios this winter. So Primetime Live was sort of that combination. It was not exactly like United Wrestling Network. It was different promotions working together. and they're going back to this studio. So it's kind of vague and unclear, but always curious when things are cooking with Marquez.
Now, speaking of Marquez, he's always got things going on, but not necessarily with him. But the Global Pro Wrestling Summit. Remember, they were going to run that show, and they were going to be. I'm trying to remember if it was Israel or not, but I don't know. Have you heard anything on what's going on with them lately? And are they going to be running Israel again? Are they going to be running this wrestling summit basically?
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet for that. You know, sometimes you have these ambitious plans and you're waiting to see what happens, and you know, nothing really, nothing comes of it. So I'm really curious to see, you know, how that ends up developing.
Rumored that they may be running Israel January 2024. So I'm keeping my
Oh,
eye
really?
out on
Okay,
that.
I'm always curious
Yeah.
about that. Hopefully, it goes better than. Well, it was never necessarily Goldberg's uh, show, but you know, when Sting certainly and RVD were booked, it seemed somewhat ambitious. But I'd love to hear what comes about from that.
So as far as the wrestling business, I mean, we were always talking about different things, but we always kind of end up talking about Fight TV somehow. I feel like almost every show we're talking about what's the latest on Fight and what are they up to?
Yeah, really interesting because certainly their parent Triller has always done big shows, or certainly recently, you know, with rap battles and things like that. But sort of Fight was just, you know, the fights or more traditional fights outside of pillow wrestling and celebrity boxing and so on. But surprise, surprise, they're hosting a pay per view with Eric Clapton, I think for 2 nights, which was really cool. So I didn't want to, you know, we call it like chutzpah to have like enough moxie to contact our friends at Fight and be like, hey, can we get Eric Clapton on to talk about, you know, when he presented that award once at Pride, which was like, just to me, it made it seem like Pride was the biggest thing in the world, that you have like a
Yeah.
huge international star that isn't generally on these type of shows, that's like in Japan and in giving someone an award. So that's one thing. And also they have a Asian Football Confederation's Premier Club. So I'm not sure if this is a big football league, but it's just interesting to see because I know that they started with rugby previously, and that was on Fight, but it's interesting to see them do even more. And I think ultimately, if they grow this, you'll have the opportunity to promote, you know, the pro wrestling and MMA to these audiences, which doesn't necessarily fully cross over, but it's just like the larger Fight gets, you know, the more opportunities there are for those that are like well positioned.
What do you think about us getting Eric Clapton on the show? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that would be awesome. Certainly an all time performer. Maybe if this one goes well, maybe the next time around I'll put in some inquiries.
I would love that. I mean, come on, Kim and Mike Weber, of course, our buddy. I mean, we're always pumping up Fight. That would be an amazing get. Eric Clapton. That's so amazing that they're working with him. Very cool stuff.
Yeah, like there's only so many legendary performers, and certainly he's among the top of the list.
So as far as Fight, obviously they've got a lot of different things going on. You've got Game Changer. You got all these different things. Is there anything more coming out of OVW and Netflix and Fight and that relationship? Have you heard anything after the series? I mean, are they getting more shows? Are they becoming more popular? What is the latest with Netflix, OVW, and Fight?
Yeah, so in terms of OVW, as we were talking about over the last few weeks, like, will there be an effect on business? And I wasn't so sure, but you know, what's nice to see is that there was an immediate effect on their regular Davis Arena show, where their show, it seemed like for the first time in quite some time, that apparently seats 400, although that sounds a little bit high to me, was sold out in advance. So there was a number of people that had come to the show who were not regulars who were even maybe from the Louisville area that were just like, I saw these people or stars now on Netflix, so I want to check it out, and they were able to sell that out in advance.
Interesting. Very interesting. And as far as TKO and the massive cuts and UFC and WWE, have you heard that there'll be any more cuts? I mean, what's like the end game here? Are they done? Because it seemed like they did a lot of cutting of a lot of talent yesterday.
So I think for now, probably, but you know, to have UFC live in one place, WWE live in another, and you have, partly you're looking at like what can we consolidate to one, like in terms of like live events, marketing, advertising, sales, sponsorships, human resources, accounting. Like, yes, remotely now you could work somewhat seamlessly, but I think eventually it'll be rolled up into to one location, especially if like if the McMahons are like totally done with WWE at some point. There's not really a particular reason to be in Stamford, Connecticut, except for these office space commitments that you've made. That I think eventually that in terms of the staff side, that'll be rolled up together. And in terms of contracts, it might not be as apparent as like we're cutting 20 today, but we need to look to see like as star contracts come due, are they renewed or are they able to go elsewhere? But it does seem like you have things pointing the other way now with like Jade Cargill coming to WWE, certainly when there's like assets from AEW to take off the table. My feeling is, and he's doing great, of course, in AEW, that Jericho will have his final run in the WWE. He's really rebuilt himself so well in AEW that there'd be money left on the table if he didn't come back to WWE someday.
And just a final little interesting note here: Shawn Michaels had a like on Twitter of a negative tweet about Stephanie McMahon, and just reported by Nick Houseman that he actually doesn't even run his own Twitter. It was somebody else. Obviously somebody that works for WWE that runs the Twitter account, and they liked it kind of by accident, or they were clicking on it and they liked it by accident. So Shawn Michaels didn't really like a tweet being negative about Stephanie McMahon. Not sure if you saw that or not.
No, I didn't yet see that, but I could imagine, like, and I feel like unless it's pattern behavior to like grab one like or maybe even like a reshare if you push the wrong button, like you have to give someone an opportunity and really look for sort of a pattern or a trail before like accuse before saying that that's their opinion. And then certainly for most people their social media isn't run by them. Like certainly exciting when John Cena followed me on Twitter, but he follows a lot of people, and it probably wasn't him. But I've certainly seen other people be like, "Oh my gosh, John Cena followed me," and if it makes them happy, that's fine.
Very true. Very true. All right, let's hit the plugs. You follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. Check out the website, tmptempire.com. Lavi, what do you got?
Follow me on linecubjobsearch.com in terms of my long form articles, but follow me on Twitter at Lavimarg, LAVIEMARG, and check out our ever growing LinkedIn group, The Business of the Business, the pro wrestling industry. We're getting so popular now that I had my first comment troll in the group, so I had to kick that person out to maintain our professional reputations.
Nice. Nice. Hey, you got to get them. You know what I mean? You got to get those trolls for sure.
They'll
But
overtake it otherwise.
yes, true, true. But thank you to Lavi. Thank you to Box Brown. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. We'll see you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.